Okay, so we'll take a look at one more necessary assumption question. Notice the question stem, the words here are exactly the same as the one we just looked at. This question is also a hard question like the previous one we just did, but the difficulty resides somewhere else. Right? Remember I mentioned that the LSAT writers have an option of turning up the dial on the difficulty either in the answer choices or in the stimulus. Here I think the difficulty is squarely in the stimulus. You'll feel it, I'm sure, as you read this. Right? Let's just take a look. When exercising the muscles in one's back, it's important in order to maintain a healthy back to exercise the muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally. After all, balanced muscle development is needed to maintain a healthy back, since the muscles on the opposite sides of the spine must pull equally in opposing directions to keep the back in proper alignment and protect the spine. So it's a mess, right? I mean, the first thing we have to do is clarify the structure of the argument. Where are my premises? What's the conclusion? Well, fortunate for us, there are some structural indicators, right? Sentence 1 is true. Why? After all, sentence 2. Do you see the after all here signaling that the support structure flows this way? Sentence 1 is declared. Why should you believe sentence 1? Well, after all, right? You see, because of sentence 2. So perhaps this is the conclusion, this is the premise, and the support goes like this. But wait, look, now we have another premise indicator. For, since, because. Those are all premise indicators, as is after all. Now we say sentence 2 is true, but why? Why should I believe sentence 2? Since sentence 3. So you see the support structure flows up once again. So you have one premise supporting another premise supporting a conclusion. This is a complex argument. We call this middle premise because it's both receiving support and giving support, right? It's receiving support and it's throwing support. We call this middle thing a major premise / sub-conclusion, right? Sub-conclusion in the sense that, well, you're receiving support from here, and major premise in the sense that, well, you're giving support here. Okay, so it's simultaneously a conclusion and a premise. Great. So that's the structural analysis. We haven't done the substantive analysis yet, meaning we don't know what the argument's talking about. We've merely pulled apart the support structure. So it's a good start, right? But let's take a look at the first sentence. We're talking about exercising muscles in your back. And we're saying that if you want to maintain a healthy back, it's important that you exercise the muscles on the opposite sides of your spine equally. Okay, so this sentence is laying out a relationship between a goal, right? A goal, something, an outcome that you want. There's a relationship laid out between this goal and this plan of action, right? In other words, this exercise regimen. And what is the relationship? Well, it's one of importance. You want to achieve this goal? Then it's important you do this thing, okay? Now, you might wonder, well, wait, is this like conditional? Is it sufficiency, necessity? I don't know. The answer is I honestly just don't know. That sounds like a fairly deep philosophical question to me. What is the relationship between sufficiency, necessity on the one hand and importance on the other hand? Like in order to do this, must you do this? Because it's important to do this to achieve this goal. Does that mean you have to do this to achieve this goal? I'm not sure. But what I do know is the relationship that's explicitly stated. Okay, so let's capture that. On the one hand, we have this one idea. You want to maintain a healthy back. That's what I call the goal, right? That's your goal. On the other hand, you have what I call the plan of action, this verb. You have to exercise in this specific way, right? This is the specific regimen. And the relationship between the two, like I said, I'm not sure if it's a conditional relationship, but I'll just table that question and just capture the relationship as stated, which is importance, right? So they're saying, this is your goal. Well, then it's important that you do this. So I'm borrowing the language. I'm borrowing the arrow, but you see I'm modifying the arrow to signal to myself. I'm not quite sure if this is conditional, right? Okay, let's keep going. That's the main conclusion, right? The statement that receives support from the subconclusion, major premise, which says balanced muscle development is needed to maintain a healthy back. That's clearly conditional, right? And look, we're repeating the same concept. This is the same goal, maintaining a healthy back. Now we're saying that goal necessitates, requires this thing, balanced muscle development. Okay, let's represent that. And here, maintaining a healthy back is the same. balanced muscle development is over here, and the relation between the two is straightforwardly a sufficiency-necessity relationship, right? Same goal, same goal. Premise says, if this is your goal, then this is your what? Your sub-goal, so to speak, right? Your more specific goal. If you think about the relation between these two, maintaining a healthy back is a pretty broad idea. This is a narrower idea, right? This is a more specific idea. So you can think of this, if this is your broad goal, then this has to be your narrow goal. That's the premise. I'm not questioning this, right? I just accept it because it's the premise. Fine. But does that mean that this premise supports this conclusion? Does this conclusion have to follow from this premise? Well, same broad goal, right? The premise says, if this is my broad goal, then this has to be my narrow goal. Conclusion says, well, therefore, if this is your broad goal, it's important that you follow this plan of action. Well, what are they assuming? They're assuming that this plan of action has to somehow lead to this goal, right? Because, look, the conclusion lays out that if this is your broad goal, then premise, of course, this has to be my narrow goal. Why is it important that I do this plan of action? It must be that this plan of action is somehow relevant to achieving this narrow goal. Okay, and now no longer speaking in the abstract, generalized terms. The advantage of speaking in abstract general terms is that you can use the same language on completely different questions, right? But let's speak in specific terms. The assumption is that exercising muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally, that plan of action must somehow get me to balanced muscle development, right? That's gotta be required. Or at least, this is starting to look like the bridging type of necessary assumption, right? Up to this point, the two other questions we did were the protecting type, the shielding type, right? Make it so that the premise can still possibly support the conclusion. Here, I suspect that they're going to try to bridge these two ideas, okay? You don't have to build a, fully modern automated suspension bridge, right? Because there's not sufficient assumption. You can just build like a dinky, rickety little rope-bound wooden plank walkway bridge, right? Something like that. But you have to sort of somehow get from this idea to this idea, right? Or somehow link these two ideas together, right? Or protect the possibility of building the bridge. I'll say that again. You could build this thin little bridge, or you could just say, well, hold on, I don't want to build the bridge just yet. I just want to state conditions such that it's possible to build the bridge. Yeah, actually, that's necessary as well. So in that way, this would once again be the shielding type of necessary assumption, right? Where you're not actually building the bridge. You're just saying, well, hold on, I just want to state conditions such that you can build a bridge, right? Something even weaker than building the bridge. Okay, so I know I've only focused on the major premise and the main conclusion, and that's how we're able to see the connection so clearly here between what's needed. I am intentionally avoiding all of this garbage. The reason is because I have the benefit of hindsight. I already know that this information is irrelevant. Okay, obviously, this is artifice. When you're doing questions timed, you're not going to know ahead, right? But let's take a look at the right answer because I want to illustrate a point here. The point is about where the difficulty of the question resides. Maybe the deeper point is how the LSAT writers are able to inject this question with difficulty. So for that, let's first look at answer choice B, and then we'll look at this, and then we'll look at the other answers. Okay, so B says, exercising muscles on opposite sides of the spine unequally tends to lead to unbalanced muscle development. Now think about that. That's precisely the opposite of this and precisely the opposite of that, right? This is the opposite of your plan of action, and this is the opposite of your goal or outcome. They're saying doing the opposite of your plan or action has a tendency to lead you to the opposite of your goal. Why is that necessary? It's necessary because if you negated it, right? If you could do exactly the opposite of your plan of action, that is to say, I'm going to work out only the left side of my back, yet somehow still possibly end up with balanced muscle development, well, now you sever the link. Yes, my main goal is this. My more detailed goal is this. Now I don't see why it's important to exercise equally, because apparently unequal exercise may still nonetheless lead to balanced development, right? That's the negation of answer choice B. So you see, the negation of answer choice B completely wrecks the support structure. Okay, that's why it's the right answer. Now, maybe that was too fast, right? Let me map out all the logical possibilities here, right? There aren't too many because, well, let's think about your goal / what the possible outcomes could be, right? And let's think about your plan of action. Okay, so on the one hand, you could exercise equally, right? Exercise left and right muscles on their back equally, or what? Or not equally, right? There really isn't too many other options here. And this just has to do with the nature of what we're talking about. And now similarly for the outcome, you just really have two options, right? One is you end up with balanced muscle development, or alternatively, it's not balanced, okay? So now recall back in our argument analysis, what we had anticipated. I said that if this were a bridging type, and I said I kind of thought this might be a bridging type, turned out I was wrong, right? Turned out the answer choice was like, actually, I'm just gonna protect your ability to build a bridge. I'm not gonna build the bridge for you. How do we conceive of the bridge using this framework? Well, we're saying that this plan of action had better lead to this outcome, right? I'm not sure what kind of bridge. It doesn't have to be a super strong bridge like the way, in sufficient assumptions, right? You just say, okay, if you do this, then you're going to get that, right? That's that modern suspension bridge that I talked about, right? Really clear, really strong. If you exercise equally, you will get balanced muscle development. That's sufficient assumption. We don't really need that, right? You just needed something way weaker, like a little walk bridge, right? So how do I maybe like dotted lines, right? Something that gets you from here. Like, look, exercising muscle equally has to make it at least possible so that your muscle is developing in balance, right? Something weaker like that. Okay, so that is what we said was necessary. Now here's the twist. Given the nature of these two ideas, right, the fact that they are mutually exclusive, right? They are mutually exclusive, meaning you cannot have both. If you have one, you don't have the other. And if you don't have one, you have to have the other, meaning out of these two options, you have to choose exactly one, right? This one means not this one. This one means not this one. Not this one means this one, and not this one means this one, right? So if you have studied conditional logic, what I'm saying here is there are biconditionals. There's the forever part biconditional. Now, that just happens to be the case, right? It didn't have to be the case. It just happens the way they phrased, the ideas here about balance versus, that just happened to be the case. I bring that up because we can take advantage, or I should say the LSAT writers took advantage of that unstated but true relationship. These two things are mutually exclusive. They took advantage of that in constructing answer choice B. And I want to show that to you by suggesting another way to get to, some kind of bridge here without saying it. And here it is. You can say exercising muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally can't lead to unbalanced, right? Cannot lead to unbalanced muscle development. That has to be necessary. You have to prevent this from happening. You have to prevent it. Just imagine if you didn't prevent it. If you didn't prevent it, you are saying doing this leads to this, which means it can't lead to this. Now you've forever severed the link between premise and conclusion. But if you do block this, right? If you do block this, because they're mutually exclusive, you've now strongly hinted at the existence of this. And again, this has to do with just the common sense relationships between these ideas. Right? We are talking about exercising muscles. There's a sense in which if you exercise your muscle just by common sense, right, it's going to lead to some kind of muscle development. Really, the only option is whether it's balanced or not balanced. Those are your two only options. That's why if you reject one of these routes, you're strongly hinting at the existence of this other route. Okay? So all of that is from the equal exercise of muscles on opposite side. B, I'm sure you noticed, was talking about it from the unequal side, right? Unequal side. What must we say from the unequal side in order for this argument to still work? Well, we must say that unequal exercise cannot lead to balanced development, right? We have to block this path. We must. Because if this path were able to exist, then why is it important that I do this? It's not. It's no longer important that I do this because I can just do the opposite of it and still end up at my goal. Do you see? So that's why it's so important, in other words, necessary, to block this path. And now finally we get to the point. B merely implies this blockage. It doesn't state it. What is explicitly stated in answer choice B is that doing this does lead to this. That's what's stated. Why is this necessary? Because of the mutual exclusivity of these two results. That's why. You have to have this thing have a tendency more to result in this than to result in this. Or stated another way, if this thing has a tendency to result in this, it's not stated, but it's implied that it's not going to result in this because these two are mutually exclusive. Okay, you see what I mean? Like what B is explicitly stating is this. Doing this thing leads to this thing. Why is that necessary? It's necessary because it implies that this route is blocked. Okay, so now let's unveil the full complexity of this stimulus by engaging with the minor premise. We're told that the muscles on opposite sides of the spine must pull equally in opposing directions to keep the back in proper alignment and protect the spine. Now, this statement is also a conditional statement. There are two ideas here, and the two ideas are laid out in a sufficiency necessity kind of way. One idea is sufficient for the other idea is necessary for the first. All right, what are the two ideas? One idea is muscles on opposite sides of the spine pulling equally in opposing directions. That's one idea. What's the other idea? Keeping the back in proper alignment and protecting the spine. These two ideas have a sufficiency necessity relationship. Here we have idea 1, idea 2, right? It's just kind of verbatim from the stimulus. They have a sufficiency necessity relationship as indicated by the word must, right? Must. You want this, you want to keep your back in proper alignment and protect the spine, well, you must do this. So now we have the argument fully mapped out. This is the minor premise supporting the major premise / sub-conclusion, which supports the main conclusion. You look at this statement here, your big goal is to maintain your healthy back, right? That's your overreaching goal. This claim is saying, okay, to do that, you have to have the smaller goal of balanced muscle development. You think to yourself, well, hold on a second. Remember earlier, I was like, I can't question this, right? I have to accept this because earlier I was viewing this from the premise perspective. You don't question premises, right? Because from this to this, yeah, this is just a premise. I accept it. If this is true, does this have to be true? Now, however, that's no longer the case because now I'm viewing this part of the support structure. This is no longer acting as a premise. It's a conclusion. It's supposed to receive support from this claim, which means now I get to be skeptical. Well, hold on a second. Say my big goal is to maintain healthy back. Must my smaller goal be to have balanced muscle development? Well, the premise is saying keeping your back in proper alignment and protecting the spine necessitates muscles on opposite sides of the spine pulling equally in opposing directions, right? Okay, now I have to accept this statement, right? This is now the premise. So this is definitely true. If this is true, does it mean that this has to be true? See, not really, but with some common sense fudging, maybe, right? Like you can kind of see the relationship between these two ideas, keeping your back in proper alignment, protecting the spine. Surely that has to be relevant for, maintaining a healthy back, right? There's got to be some relationship here between the two. And then also you can see some relationship between here. Muscles on opposite sides of your spine pulling equally, right? That has to somehow be related to balanced muscle development, right? So in other words, if the correct answer choices wanted to reveal the gaps in this part of the reasoning, which is not what the correct answer is doing. Correct answer choice B is revealing the gap in this part of the reasoning, right? We've already talked about that. But if, and I suppose the outside writers could have done this, if the correct answer choice wanted to reveal the hole in this part, they would have had to do something with, this connection, or they would have had to do something with this connection, right? Something about like, look, and here I'm making up a potential correct answer choice in some different world, right? So a potential correct answer choice could have said something like, keeping your back in proper alignment and protecting the spine is a part of maintaining a healthy back, right? Yeah, that has to be necessary. Otherwise, you would have severed the connection. Or something like, look, to achieve muscle development, balanced muscle development, there's something about muscles on opposite sides pulling in opposing directions equally, right? Because yeah, that connection has to be there, because if not, well, then you've actually just severed the connection, right? There's no connection. Okay, so that's what you have to do. But now I want you to contrast that with what A is actually doing. A says muscles on opposite sides of the spine that are equally well developed, that's this idea, right, will be enough to keep the back in proper alignment. That's half of this first idea. Right? They're saying this thing here, if you accomplish this goal, then that's sufficient, right? That's sufficient, this kind of arrow, to this thing. What? Why do I need this arrow? I mean, I don't, right? But you see how bizarre answer choice A is. I mean, in a sense, A is just almost randomly drawing connections, right? And having laid out the structure of the argument as clearly as we have, I think is not too difficult now to see why A isn't necessary. I mean, way more than not necessary. I don't even know what A is doing. Like, why draw an arrow from here to here? We don't need that arrow. I don't even know does this arrow even help our argument? Not really, right? It doesn't. What we need is some kind of connection between this and this, and we need some kind of connection between this and this. A's like, well, let me just draw a random arrow like this, right? Or whoops, like this, right? Or maybe like this. Do you see? It's just not following the logic of the argument. Now, it might surprise you to learn that A is a really attractive wrong answer choice. Nearly a quarter of students choose that. And that's a really high percentage, by the way, for one wrong answer choice to have. Right? That means there's something psychologically really appealing about this. And earlier I said this question is difficult because the stimulus is difficult. Hopefully I've shown that by now, right? Because now that you see this laid out so clearly, I suspect you don't think A is attractive anymore. I think you see A for what it is, which is some random nonsense. But then how do you explain the popularity of A? I mean, truth be told, I don't know, but my suspicion is that when people encounter answer choice A, they don't have this in their mind, which is why A is so attractive. Because look, Alan, this was talked about, right? And so was proper backalignment. That was talked about too. So yeah, maybe it does make sense to draw a connection from this to this. Well, only if the actual logic of the argument isn't clear. And C is the same, also attracting about a quarter of students, even though it's wrong. C says, provided that one exercises the muscles on opposite sides of the spine equally, that's what idea is that? Right? It's this idea. What is it connecting to? One will generally have a healthy back. I guess it's this idea, right? Or this idea. I mean, maintain healthy back, have a healthy back. That is like same. So what's C doing? C's connecting this idea to this idea? It was already connected, right? Or this idea to this idea? Well, we don't need that, right? You see, so once again, having the argument laid out so clearly, the structure of it helps you sidestep what would otherwise be really attractive traps. I mean, just try to explain why this is not necessary, right? It's not that easy. One shortcut to seeing how this is not necessary is just by appealing to this, right? Being like, look, I need to, this and this is already the same, so the connection is established, right? Well, I just need to establish this connection, right? If we're dealing with this. Alternatively, if we're dealing with this, then I need to maintain some kind of connection here, and I need to maintain some kind of connection here, right? Anything else is just not necessary. That's the shortcut way of seeing it, the structural way of seeing it. Now, if you want to, substantively, why is this not necessary? It's because the conclusion didn't say that this will be sufficient to get you a healthy back. The conclusion said, if you want to maintain a healthy back, it's important that you do this. Is it also important that you do some other thing or some, third thing? Yeah, it's totally possible. C says, well, hold on, no. As long as you do this, you're going to have this. No, we don't need that, right? We absolutely just do not need it. Now, D, I think, is trying to scare you into picking it. It says if the muscles on opposite sides of the spine are exercised unequally, meaning, again, like answer choice B, we're doing the opposite of this plan, then your back will be irreparably damaged, right? Damaged beyond repair. Okay, I don't think we need that to be true, right? I mean, what is the thing that we need to be true? The thing that we need to be true is way lighter than this, way gentler than this, right? What we need to be true is that if you exercise the muscles on opposite sides of your spine unequally, we need that to not lead to balanced muscle development. That's it. We need this plan of action to take you astray, right? To take you off the right path to balance muscle development. That's all we need, which is exactly what B says. D's like, no, not enough. Not only am I going to take you off the right path, I'm going to lead you off a cliff and you're going to die. Okay, that's way too severe, right? We don't need that. And lastly, E is also this kind of mishmash word salad of an answer choice, right? It says, actually, in fact, it introduced some new ideas. One should exercise daily to ensure that muscles on opposite sides of the spine keep the back in proper alignment. So you have muscles on opposite sides of the spine, right? Muscles on opposite. So that's where this idea was mentioned. So it repeats that. It repeats the idea of keeping the back in proper alignment, right? And then it introduces this new idea of daily exercise to make sure that this thing leads to this thing. Okay, yeah, that's a complete mess, right? Do we need it? No, we don't need it. What if this were false? No big deal. This argument can still run through. And by that I mean this premise can still support this conclusion.